All right, here we are live in social media land, and here we are on the podcast, the 60th episode of this podcast. And I cannot think of a better guest to speak to than somebody from here in my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, a champion for children. And I can tell you, I know that because I've sat on the sidelines and I've watched the fight. I've even raised my fist behind her a few times. So, Jill Speering, welcome to the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast. I am so glad you are here. Tell us the Jill story.
Yes, thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you for having me. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. And I'm a teacher of 35 years and then a board member for another 8 years. And as I was getting off the board, I had worked with a director that reminded me of my father. And it was such a strong feeling that I knew I had to write a book. So before I even left the board, I began writing. And it really put a lot of things in perspective for me. As a child, I had 6 adverse childhood experiences, which were emotionally compelling challenges that really played havoc on my life. And my father and mother both lived through World War One, 13 years of the Depression, and World War II. And when my father came back from the war, he was angry and he took it out on the kids. And so his daily mantra for me was, "What's wrong with you? Are you stupid?" And that became my internal speech. What's wrong with me? Am I stupid? And that played out. I hated school. I kept reinforcing that belief, and it kept appearing, within my life. And by the time I was in 5th grade, the havoc at home, and then having a teacher that thought as highly of me as my own father was just too much. And before the end of the year, she let me know that I was going to have to repeat the grade. And that has been a source of shame and embarrassment for me. For 30 years, I tried my best to hide it. My father was kind enough to send me to a different school so I didn't have to face the same people and have that failure reflected at me. But I had a wonderful 5th grade teacher, and she thought I was intelligent. And I just couldn't believe it. I thought, where did she get this idea? And I had really gotten used to abuse. I was not used to success. I was not used to someone telling me or someone believing in me. Now, my mother loved me and believed in me, but she didn't have a voice.
Right.
My father, would backhand her if she talked back to him. But to have this teacher that believed in me, and sometimes we talk about high expectations, but it's more than high expectations. It's love.
Yes.
It's belief. And I kept thinking, I pulled the wool over her eyes some way or another, and the shoe's going to drop anytime, and she's going to see what a failure I am. But I thought, I'm going to keep it going as long as I can.
Hey, that's smart, right? But wow, what a powerful thing. I mean, I sit there and think about how many people feel that as an adult or in a career, feel that in their lives general, and for you to be able to think about that in 5th grade. Keep going. That just kind of hit my heart a little bit.
Yes. So as the year went on, I began to believe her, and I began to believe in myself. And I wanted to live up to her vision of me.
Wow.
And I started doing my homework without being cajoled. I loved school. I couldn't get enough of school. then they started telling me I was an overachiever. I didn't quite know what label to give me.
Wow.
But another thing is that when I was in second or third grade, I had trouble pronouncing my R's, and I said "webbit" instead of rabbit. And when they sent me to speech class, and in the speech class, I got to have this wonderful one-on-one with a speech teacher who taught me how to hold my mouth and where to put my tongue. And I learned how to say my R's pretty quickly, but I hid it from her. I didn't want her to know that I knew how to do it because I knew my time with her would be up.
Wow.
And I loved that time with her. And so these few teachers along the way just really changed my life. And that made me want to become the educator who could help children like myself. And as that transpired, I became, my life had come full circle. And, as I look back over my life and people say, well, you love your mother, but your mother really let you down. But my mother was raised at a time
Yes.
where, she was raised on a cotton farm in North Carolina, and there were 18 children in her family. My grandmother raised 18 children, and my mother was the girls in the family received about a 6th grade education, because in those days girls were expected to be housewives, so they didn't need an education. But the boys got college educations. So when things were so bad with my dad and all the kids were saying, please, Mama, get us out of here, my mother said, I can't. I don't have an education. I can't support you. So all of these little, what seemed to be horrendous at the time, things like that happened to me actually propelled me into the first one in my family, in my immediate family, to get a college education, because I didn't want to be stuck in a marriage. And, to be able to be a teacher who helped children succeed rather than perpetuate more failure.
I mean, I think you've said so much there. And I think one of the things I hear is the power of education, right? As a form of liberation. And I think, wow. I mean, you and I talked earlier that there were some defining moments in your life. And one of those that you were discussing was when you forgave. But when you said that, I didn't anticipate who you said you would forgive. So what was that defining moment, and who was it that you forgave?
Yes, I've been reading, I guess when I was in my 20s or 30s, and I wanted to forgive my father, but I didn't know how to do it. And I thought, okay, I am going to make a decision. I don't feel it, but I'm going to make a decision. But still, I couldn't get there. But finally, it became clear to me that the person I was forgiving was myself, for buying into the belief that I wasn't smart, for buying into the belief that I wasn't whole, and that was a wonderful experience too. And still today, I mean, I notice those, that internal dialogue coming up, and I have to remember that that some of that inner voice is not telling me the truth. It's telling me it's an old program that's running. Yeah. Oops, I lost you.
Look, I did the classic not unmuting. How long have we been doing this, Jill? And here I still forget to unmute. My goodness sakes. But what I was going to say is, that role plays out of forgiveness and the power of forgiveness in so many different ways. Yeah. But even more powerful of what you said earlier is what we speak into kids and how we handle kids. And I know you probably heard of the Pygmalion study, where basically a group of students were given to two teachers. They had about the same academic achievement, but one teacher was told, this group of kids is so high. They are highly gifted, highly intelligent. And the other one, the teacher, they were like, oh, they're average students. Just simply by that, the ability of the kids was higher in the classroom because the teacher believed. And
Yes.
I heard what you just said about that 5th grade teacher, and we've all had them. I had them. Mine was in high school. His name was Mr. Greer. And it's funny because I posted something on social media. My school experience was not great. And I put something, he's like, I'm sorry I failed you. And I'm like, no, if anybody, you were the one that
Yes.
supported me. So I think what you said is so powerful in so many ways. And then you mentioned like the experience with your father, right? So talk about the impact of that generational experience and that the generational transfer of trauma. We talk about it on this podcast all the time.
Yes. Both my parents were raised, and even their parents, my grandparents, they were raised in poverty. And that, I can see that in myself. I mean, to spend money on myself is very difficult to this day because, we watched every penny. We ate beans for dinner. And, it was just, it was an interesting experience when I see other people, freely spend money. I'm thinking, I wish I didn't give myself, I felt guilty, if I spend money. And, but when I was being raised, when I was young, the sentiment was, spare the rod and spoil the child.
Mm-hmm.
Children are to be seen and not heard.
Still exists these days, by the way.
Does it?
It does.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. And so I didn't have a voice. I was afraid to speak. And not too long ago, I was taking a pottery class, and I noticed that different people would, ask the teacher questions. Not me. I would get up from my pottery wheel and go over and ask the teacher individually because I didn't want to be seen as stupid. And to be able to use my voice was really wonderful. And when I finally learned how to do that, and part of that was on the school board.
Mm-hmm.
As when I first was elected to the school board, I made a promise to myself that I would never go a school board meeting without having something to say, without using my voice. And I kept that over 8 years. I kept that promise to myself. And sometimes I had to say things that nobody else was willing to say. And I got in some trouble about it.
Yeah. Hey, welcome to, I don't know if you see this right here, but it says Disruptors Unite. See that? And then down underneath me. Yeah. Welcome to the Disruptors, where we say things that make people uncomfortable. It's okay. It's part of progress, right?
That's right. That's right. And I don't regret anything that I did on the school board. And as I look back over my life, there's not a whole lot of regrets that I experienced, because I do feel like my life has had meaning. And sometimes that you don't really feel it, or I didn't feel it at the time, that there was something to this trauma. Right. There was something that I could learn. There was something that I could, transform and into something wonderful. And that is really what my book is about, that transformation.
Well, and I think that it is important to talk about post-traumatic growth, right?
Yes.
Because there has to be the right atmosphere, the right supports. All of those things have to be in place for that to occur. And it is possible. And it happens with a lot of people. And unfortunately, trauma impacts people in different ways, right? And how people cope with those experiences. There's so many ways, but hearing these possibilities, I hope, give people hope, because there is hope there. And I want to go back to something else that you talked about, and that is not giving kids voice.
Yes.
I think we are of epidemic proportions in education of not giving kids voice, because our kids have so much to say. My own child, sometimes I don't want to hear his voice when he's self-advocating, right? And I have to keep myself in check and go, what is he trying to say? And I think, Jill, when I say student voice, I mean when they're having struggles and those escalations are happening, they use their voice. I love nothing better than when a kid was upset that would say, "Get away from me." Okay.
Yes.
That means that's you need space, right?
Yes.
But like adults are like, "Don't talk to me like that. You're disrespecting me." No, actually, they're self-advocating, right?
Yes.
And I think we have, and what you said your mom grew up in, right? We have generational experiences of women, people of color, indigenous people, LGBTQ people. And we have generations of people who have been told, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. And it starts at an early age. It goes through schools, and we get to being adults. And then we say, I don't know what happened to people. Yes, I do. It's called oppressiveness. It's called keeping people quiet. And I hear your experience, and I grew up in a very similar way, although I never took the advice to be quiet. I always said something. Matter of fact, I always had the last word. But that's what got me in trouble is I used my voice, and people didn't like that. But what powerful experience that you're sharing. So talk about this. Talk about how teaching helped you process and work through the experiences that you had and made you a better teacher.
Yes. When I began to incorporate the writing process in my classroom, instead of giving the children a sentence to start with, I asked them to write about, they chose their topics. And that was a big responsibility for kindergarten and first grade students. But it was so powerful because, they wrote about their lives. I mean, we write about what we know, and they wrote about what was going on in their life. And they, or they could, if they couldn't think of something, I'd send them over to the gerbil cage, and they could write about what their gerbils were doing and the babies they were having. And but being able to write and then have someone to say, this is good. And instead of saying, look at the mistakes, seeing what's right about that writing. It's moving left or right. It's, out of this word with 5 letters, they got 3 of them right. And, and praising that kind of success.
It's, out of this.
Sorry about that. That's me.
Okay.
I hit the wrong button.
That breeds success. And I know that Summer Redstone wrote the book Passion to Win, and he says success is not built on success. I don't agree with that. I think success is not completely built on success because it's also built on failure and frustration and sometimes even catastrophe. And the children would come in writing about the things that happened. Another opportunity that we had in the classroom was how kids love to tattletale. So I started a book called Tell the Teacher. And it was so popular. The kids would go up and tell what somebody did to them. And it was so popular that I had to incorporate rules around how many people could be in line to tell their side of the story. And then we could have a peace circle, at the end of the day or when it was necessary to kind of sort through some of the issues. But giving children a voice was just, it was exciting to me as a teacher to hear what they had to say. And when I built my curriculum around their interest and their needs and their prior experiences, teaching was a joy. And it was a joy to me, and it was a joy to the children.
I
So,
think too, thinking about that in a cultural aspect, I taught non-English speakers, right?
yeah,
Or English wasn't their first language. And I did a lot of the same thing. The kids they wanted to do nothing more than to talk about if they weren't born in the US, they were born somewhere else. All they wanted to do is talk about it or write about it. And that was during the English only debate in 2006 to 2008 in Tennessee, when we were trying to pass laws where you weren't allowed to access anything outside of English. But nonetheless, my kids wrote about in fourth grade. They wrote about their feelings about the English only bill. I didn't tell them to do that. That was what they wanted to write about. And I
yes,
can tell you, Jill, I still have, it's right over here on this bookshelf, actually, the writings of my students in 2006 and 2007 and 2008, during that political time in Tennessee. It's powerful, right? And motivation
yes,
drives so much, and motivation, confidence for sure. And I want to go back to one other thing you said about the failure piece, right?
yes, yes,
In 2001, education changed once we started doing standardized assessments and using test scores as the driving force behind all we do. Isn't it interesting that then this progression of over 20 years, that now failure comes with so much shame that not only are kids afraid to fail, teachers are afraid to fail,
yes,
schools are afraid to maybe not get it right once or twice, districts are like, it's just this breeding of education right now.
yes, yes. And it's so, it really impacts learning negatively.
Fact.
And if teachers, if the communities could respect what the teachers know and and how they can interact with children, rather than all of these state and federal mandates that actually inhibit the learning process rather than supporting the learning process. Be nice to have more legislators in our schools so they could, especially in your school where you used to be, and the inner city schools are so important. All of the schools are important, but children who have been through generational trauma and complex trauma, consistent trauma, need that kind of affirmation daily, and sometimes hourly.
And I'm going to be honest and tell you, it's all schools now.
Yeah.
Every school. I think about just south of our city. Jill knows this district well. It's called Williamson County. It's one of the most affluent. It is the most affluent county in the state of Tennessee. And I can tell you, there is more relational trauma there than there probably is in any school in Nashville. We have kids that don't see parents, or when they do see parents, it's minimally. And when they do see parents minimally, there's trauma exists in every single community. And I think that in a lot of times teachers miss the mark when they think, oh, well, I don't teach in that kind of school. Oh no, if you're teaching in a school, there is a kid, statistically, there is a kid or 3 or 4 or 5 in your classroom that have experienced some sort of trauma. And I think when we understand that, then this is why every educator, I don't care if you teach in the most rural place or you teach in the downtown of a city, we all have to understand the impact of trauma on our kids, because right now we have behavior modification. We don't have healing-centered education. We have kids that must comply, not kids that need to learn skills of regulation and how to manage big emotions. And that's the paradigm that has to shift for sure.
Yes.
Again, going back to what you said, it's about building that expectation through that big L word, love.
Yes, yes, yes. I can remember a time where I was teaching in a different district, but they told us as kindergarten teachers not to hug our children.
Isn't it something?
I know. And the kindergarten teachers I knew said, no, I'm not going to do that. But it was for fear of being sued.
Mm-hmm.
And, we let so much fear move us rather than what we know is right to do. And that's right. Love is the bottom line. And that's what brings us together.
Jill, I'm going to have a confession. You're a previous board member, and I don't work in the district anymore. I hugged kids during COVID. I did. When they would come with open arms, I'd be like, I can't tell you not to. No way. So I hugged children during COVID. I did.
Yes.
Guilty as charged.
Yes.
And you know what? Sometimes that's what kept me going. Is just experiencing that kids' unconditional affirmations of the adults, because like you said, you loved your mom, you loved those experiences. And so at the end of the day, we have to shift this paradigm of we have to operate schools in love and expectations. I don't want anybody to think what I'm saying is let kids do whatever they want when they want and there's no expectations. No, it's just the expectations are built to teach.
Yes.
Not to humiliate, not to shame, and not to punish.
Yes. And those expectations are built on belief that those children can succeed and will succeed.
Yeah.
And when I was in the classroom and I had children who were falling between the cracks, I felt like it was my failure. Because I didn't think that it was the children's fault. I thought it was my fault as a teacher. And fault might be two words, but it's my responsibility as a teacher to ensure that every child succeeded. And that's why I went outside the district seeking more ways to reach these children. And at one point I was sent to Columbus, Ohio, and studied for a year there in reading recovery. And there I learned to accept approximations. And I thought, if I'd only had that. But even as an adult, I have to accept my own approximations, and have to keep nurturing myself and doing that self-regulation. And like you said, everybody has trauma. And when I wrote my book, and different people would read it, and I would want them to call me and let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And some of the people that I wouldn't have thought had trauma, and they wanted to tell me their story about their traumatic experiences coming from the church or school or a variety of things. But I think you're right. I think everybody has suffered some type of trauma, and so the children, that's going to play out in the children's lives.
Well, and the thing is, Jill, even if people haven't, I think still operating in a way that is compassionate, is empathetic, is built in honoring people, even if they haven't, I think treating people that way is still the way to go. And I don't think these practices aren't for the kids who've experienced trauma. They're for all kids. It's rehumanizing education. We've got to get back to seeing kids as individual kids with individual needs. And we've got to get over this idea that every kid has to be at the same place at the same time, and they have to do the same way on the same test every year, because it's not how it works. Jill, I was not a good student. I was not a straight A student until graduate school. And then I actually loved what I was learning, and I was passionate about it, right? Like, by all accounts, I shouldn't have been a principal. By all accounts, I shouldn't be a director of communities for a large national nonprofit organization. But that's because that's the construct that was set for me.
Yes. And that makes you the perfect person to do this.
I tell people I'm a lot of things, and distinguished is not one of them, but I absolutely am very passionate. And I think that goes a long way. So let's get to that book. And your book is titled Rubies in the Rubble: An Educator's Transformation from Pain to Prominence, from Abuse to Absolution.
Yes.
Let's talk about the book. And you don't have to tell the whole book, because we want people to be able to get it. And if you have a copy before you leave, I want you to put it up for those people that are live.
Yes.
But tell us about the book. And I know you said you had to write it. So tell us just a little about it.
Yes. When it was time for me to get off the board, I realizing some of the personalities that I had encountered on the board, I couldn't not write the book. I had to write the book. It poured out of me like a fountain. And the book really is about transformation, and it's about, as I looked back on my life, I realized that there was this power, God, it was there was a flow of life that, although I didn't realize, I felt like I was really in the depths of hell sometimes, but all of that had a purpose. And once I determined what the purpose was, it transformed my life. And that's really what the book is about all the way through it. That's the theme, is that there's these rubies and what we think is the rubble. But as we look at our life more closely, those rubies begin to surface from the ground, and it's really a beautiful story, even though there's a lot of funny parts in it, but there's also a lot of trauma in it. And that trauma, knowing that the trauma turned into something, what for me, it was passion. It turned into passion that I didn't want another child to fail. And I would do whatever it took so that would not happen. And so, yeah, the book was very healing for me. And I love the fact that when I talk to other people about it, it's healing for them, because they begin to see the rubies in their own life.
And I think that's how it
Yeah.
works, right? I think that's called a collective care, right? It's connecting each other through our adversities or our experiences, and through that collective space is how we move forward. And Jill, I've been talking a lot in a lot of places, and most recently I was speaking in Houston at the Attachment Trauma Network conference, and came out of my mouth that we can't self-care our way out of the current situation in education right now.
Yeah.
We have to collectively care. And what you just said is, as educators, we've got to sit around with other educators, and we've got to share those stories. We got to share the weight we carry. We've got to use our voices in ways to advocate for ourselves and others, and even our kids and our families and our communities. Because right now we are in a space in education that we've never been before. That legislation is coming in ways it's never come before. Matter of fact, they're trying to in a lot of places, in a lot of spaces, in a lot of states, they're trying to have us not even be able to talk about what you and I are talking about trauma and social and emotional health and learning, equity, and all of these things. There are actually legislators that are saying you're not going to be allowed to talk about that. And so I think as educators, we have to lift our voices up. We have to connect to other educators. We have to do what Jill's book has done for many of her friends and connect those conversations, because it's how we all do continue and move forward. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. And I mean, I think of my book as a call to action, that we have got to unite, and we've got to be advocates for our children, because oftentimes that's what they have. We're it. And it's not somebody else's responsibility. It's each of our responsibilities. And to advocate, to join together, to march on Washington. I mean, we are the ones who can do it.
Right. And let's just not like break into it and break windows and run around Congress. Let's not do that, because that's a whole different level, right? We saw that play out. But I do want to say that even today, Jill, I was listening to a speaker on the impact of historical trauma to the Latino communities in South California. And he was talking about his experience, and I listened, and it broke me as an educator. Because what he was saying is, not only did he not have voice, but he used his voice. As a teenager, he did a walk out of the school, and he said that there were 40 kids. No, I'm sorry. There were 110 kids, and there were 40 police officers responding to 40 high school kids, or to 100 high school kids. And it's like, wait, we want kids to use their voice. And I would say we want to advocate with our kids. We want them to advocate for themselves. And that's, at Fall Hamilton, where I was the principal, we taught the 7 habits of highly effective people. And there's actually an 8th. A lot of people don't know. And the 8th is find your voice. Yes. And I think that's what we have to focus on in education. We have to shift us from going, we're going to advocate, to we're going to build schools and environments and cultures where they get to advocate for themselves, because that's the power. Because at some point, our kids have to advocate.
Yes. And when I was teaching kindergarten, our children, my children wrote every day, and I published their writings into books. And then they read each other's books. And because they saw themselves as authors, they wrote Eric Carle. And it invented spellings with no corrections. Mm-hmm. And Eric Carle wrote them back.
Yeah.
And said, I love your materials. I love these stories that your students have written. And if they can do that in kindergarten, if they can find their voice in kindergarten, what can they do when they get to 5th grade and 8th grade in high school? They can advocate for themselves and for their community.
And boy, am I going to be a Debbie Downer for a second. Okay. And the opposite of that is, how many kids are going to go silent? Yes. How many kids are going to sit in classrooms and be told to shut their mouths, sit down, be quiet, and listen to everything I say, and don't speak unless you are spoken to? Yeah. From the very first time they walk into a classroom. Yes. That's why we have to have these because what you just said is a possibility. Yes. And what you said does need to be the reality. And unfortunately, it's not. And Jill, you and I both know, because we both have experienced it. Schools, if not approaching things in the right way, can be a traumatic experience for kids.
Yes.
And we can't do that.
Yes, that's right. And I think my sister-in-law had a teacher who told her they were practicing for some play, and she asked her not to sing. And just to mouth the words. And when my brother and she got married and they were at church, my brother said, "Why aren't you singing?" And she said, "Because I can't sing." It followed her the rest of her life, that one comment. And we do things sometimes as educators without realizing the impact that it's making. So that's why the work you're doing within trauma-informed educators is so vital, because sometimes we don't realize what we're doing and what we're saying that dramatically affects our students.
Yes. Absolutely. And so, Jill, if people want to get your book, where can they find that book? How can they get their hands on it?
It's available on Amazon. And it's also available on Barnes & Noble and several other places. And it's also not only in print, but also an ebook is also available. And so it's, and I'm having several different get-togethers at my house to sign the books for people and to do some excerpt readings, and would love to have people in Nashville to come by, and I'd love to sign their book for them.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll put your address on the interwebs. I'm kidding. I won't do that. I would not do that. But yeah, if you are local and you do know Jill or want to reach out to Jill, if people are and they want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yes. On Facebook, it's facebook.com /Jill Speering Nashville, and just Jill Speering on Twitter. And my email address is jillspeering@gmail.com.
Awesome. So follow Jill, and I'm sure she's going to have a TikTok very soon. I can see she's probably been practicing some of those awesome dances. I'm just joking, Jill. I don't have TikTok. I can't do it. I just don't have the time or the effort. But nonetheless, follow Jill on those platforms and those spaces. And Jill, I want to tell you, we actually had a listener here that was from New Zealand, and I know that you got to visit New Zealand. So they said they had to leave halfway through. It's like either in the very middle of the night or very, very early in the morning. But it was awesome that people from around the world get to hear from you. And for the listeners that are listening, if you want to follow me, I am Principalist on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow this podcast on the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast on Facebook. Please, please, please give it a review. If you enjoy listening to it, it's how we get that information to other people. And I can tell you, I'm so excited that probably after this episode with Jill, we will reach 100,000 streams of this podcast. So people are definitely listening to it. And please, again, leave that review. If you want a hashtag, you can hashtag it TIE Network Cast or TIE Network. And of course, as always, the Disruptors Unite. If you're listening here live, Jill's going to show you the cover of her book so you can see it there. There it is. So if you're looking for it on Amazon, you can see exactly what it is. If you are a listener on the podcast, I will link her book as well, so you could get a copy of that if you choose. As always, please, guys, we have a conference coming up. Check it out, Trauma Informed Educators Network Conference on June 15th and 16th. There's over 30 sessions, 2 keynote speakers. You're going to have to hear from me. Sorry, it's kind of part of it. And then Judge Sheila Calloway, a local juvenile court judge who is here doing amazing trauma-informed work on the juvenile justice system. And then we're going to have an expert panel. And the best thing I think that we have to offer in our scrappy little conference is our home groups, where you get to join the same group of people after every 2 sessions, connect, collaborate, and network, and leave with relationships and a lot of new content knowledge. So thank you all for listening. And as always, please, 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 if you need to, wear a mask and wash your hands. All right, Jill, we're still live here. For those of you who are listening live, thank you so very much. We greatly appreciate it. We appreciate your participation in the podcast. Oh, I forgot to tell everybody else on the last podcast. On this Wednesday at 9 a.m., I'm going to be speaking to 3 educators who are currently in Ukraine and a ethnographer who is an expert in the Ukrainian culture. She actually writes a magazine about Ukrainian culture. And they are going to be in Ukraine. It's actually going to be in the evening in Ukraine at 9 a.m. I got to speak to some of them this week, and it was the most powerful conversation, the most heavy conversation I've had in a long time. And so I hope some of you will join that. I know it's during the day. I know many of you teach. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a conversation that is going to leave you with some perspective of what it's like to teach during the time of war. And I hope none of us have to experience that. And I hope that as educators, we can wrap ourselves around the educators in Ukraine and let them know that we see them, we hear them, and we support their efforts of trying to teach during war. So thank you all so very much. Jill, thank you. If you'll give me just a second, we'll end this and we'll talk offline. Thank you all.